All right, good morning. My name's Gary Matsuoka, and we're here at Laguna Hills Nursery on a Saturday morning. And today our class is a question and answer session with live audience and with people at home. All right, who here has questions today?
I have this on a plant. I don't know the name of the plant. I've had it for almost 2 years, and it just started doing that this year. I've got a picture of the plant, if that helps you identify it.
Well, it appears to be this appears to be a type of plectranthus, but it's a big family. That family is large, mint family, I believe it is. These are more than one thing. So you do have some sucking bugs on here that's making it sticky and black. And there are some things carving little holes in the leaves too. So with this plant, you might have to use two different things to treat it.
Okay.
The sticky bugs are most important, though. If that's a mealy bug, they're not easy to control. Any ants on the plant?
No.
This could be a type of scale. Actually, it does look like a cottony cushion bug, though. Generally, the first thing we would try to treat that with is to suffocate them with an oil spray.
Okay.
So this is one of our all-purpose oil sprays. There's a lot of different oils out there, neem oil. This is a mineral oil. There's essential oils. The holes in here, though, you would have to use a product. If it's an insect, it should be an insect with spinosad. This controls the chewing bugs, and the oil does the sucking bugs. If it's a slug or snail, you'd have to use a slug or snail bait, but this time of year, it's not common.
Anything like that. They're in a pot, so they're raised off of the ground.
Mm-hmm.
I have two of them, and it only seems to be on one.
Okay. Yeah, oil.
So the white stuff is the fungus, or
No, it's a sucking bug.
white? Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's either it could be a cottony cushion scale. It's unusual to have that. So, but it's not uncommon.
Okay.
It's not totally uncommon. So
And it hasn't bloomed. It was blooming when I bought it. Has a purplish color
if
bloom.
that's a plectranthus, a lot of those bloom in the as we go into fall.
Oh, okay.
Fall, winter, short day bloomers. So fall, winter into early spring, and then they stop for summer.
Okay.
Should start making flower buds again soon.
Okay.
Any other questions this morning from the audience? Yes.
Did any of your burgundy plums fruit this year?
Not okay. So burgundy plum, apparently we didn't get quite enough chill because they barely bloomed this year. We saw a few flowers on them, and that was it. So the chill wasn't good enough.
That was my experience as well.
Yeah. The burgundy plum, we think it needs around 350 hours. Now, one of the chill models said we got it, and the other one said we didn't. So apparently we didn't. At least though it leafed out at the right time, but it didn't bloom real well. So I don't think we got much fruit at all.
One additional question on figs. How long does it take them to actually get to the point where they're edible fruit? I mean, and I have like 4 trees for the first time, so it's a new experience for me.
Well, there's a spring crop that's pretty much already ripened, but the regular crop, which is the main crop for most figs, some figs don't have a spring crop, but the regular crop, it really depends on the heat. Now, last year we didn't have any heat at all. I don't think we broke 90, or at least the low 90s last year, and our fig trees barely made fruit by fall. I mean, some of them didn't even fruit. Whereas this year, which is more normal, a little closer to normal weather, we're running maybe 2 or 3 weeks behind schedule. But it looks like on my own tree, the first rare crop will be ripe in about 2 weeks. But the weather is going to determine that. If it's 100 degrees, it'll be sooner. If it stays in the 70s, it'll take longer. So it just depends on the weather.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the audience?
It would be the same for the Santa Rosa plum.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Santa Rosa plums, yeah, there was no chance of blooming for this year or fruiting.
Okay.
Yeah, they need closer to 400 hours of chill. And we didn't get that.
I did have one other question on the peach trees.
Mhm.
I have several, and I have one variety, which is the mid-pride, that are almost fully ripe. And then I have another one, an August pride, but I'm noticing, I did the, well, I'm noticing at the tips of some of the branches, that little borer has got in there. But for the most part, I did I guess you would call it the preparation that you're supposed to do in
Right.
late winter.
Right.
But I imagine still some of that stuff can take hold, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, the moths that lay the eggs, that's the oriental fruit moth that bores into the stem tips. They can find from your neighbor's yard. So spraying them several times a year with spinosad does help prevent them from getting into the fruit.
Oh, okay. Because I thought, well, you have to do that process in late fall, early winter, where you spray them so you don't get the
Right.
the leaf curling or whatever it is.
Peach leaf curl, but yeah, we also spray them with so the copper for the peach leaf curl disease, and then spinosad for thrips and for the oriental fruit moth, boring into the stems and boring into the fruit.
Right.
And this depending on your neighborhood, you may have to do it every month.
Okay.
If people don't treat their trees in your neighborhood, then you're stuck. You've got to keep doing it. So, yes.
When can I take my avocado? When can I take my avocado plants and put it in the ground?
Well, if you have it's in a number 5 pot.
Yeah.
And
I have it in a 15. I have 15 too.
anytime if it's mature enough to pull it out. Like if it's in a 15 gallon, I'd like the trunk to be at least 1 inch in caliper so you can actually pull it out of there without losing the roots. And then put in the ground, but you can plant them any time of year.
Not gonna be too hot. I just have to make sure.
They're always safer in the ground than they are in a pot. Pots really in the middle of summer, the soil itself gets too hot, so they're safer in the ground. Yes.
Have you had any trouble with some of Dave Wilson's clonal for the avocados? I noticed on a gem and a reed where I had that special clonal, where the other ones were just the normal ones, that they're not producing evenly. In other words, they basically flowered, and the leaves fell off. And then there was a couple leaves at the top, and there was some fruit which fell off, and the plant doesn't look like it's performing well. And I know there's a certain percentage sometimes that just don't work out. But what's your experience been, Gary?
Well, we haven't reordered the clonals for the future because we're not happy with the soil that they're using. It's not Dave Wilson, it's Brokaw Nursery, but they're just probably following what they're being advised to by other growers, that they should be putting compost around the roots, and so they're doing that now, a whole bunch of it, and it seems to be causing some troubles down the road. So we prefer growing our own. So.
I have one last question until I come up with another one. Is the straw that you use a pretty good, I guess you would call it topping for most of the plants?
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
I've been using that pretty exclusively. I don't use the chicken manure because I have dogs, and I don't like the wood product. But has your experience and other customers been pretty good with that straw?
We're selling a lot of it. I mean, straw is probably closer to dead leaves than bark or anything else is.
Okay.
So that makes more sense to us. Because in nature, it's dead leaves that cover the ground, not ground up trunks of trees.
Yeah, I'm using it on everything. Roses,
Mhm.
trees, you name it. Okay.
Yeah, I
Okay.
like that. Question behind?
This is a lame question compared to everything you're asking because I'm really new. My green beans, the leaves are, it's not like mold or anything. They just look like they're getting old. Is that typical on green beans? They're producing fine. And you can see like this succession when I plant new ones, they come out really nice and then they start getting.
Well, one of the problems we've always seen with green beans when you grow them is they get attacked by spider mites right away, and which turns them kind of grayish colored and brown edged.
Okay.
So take a look at that. If you see little webbing around the stems where the leaves attach to the main stem, that's spider mites. Now, originally, 40 years ago when I first started growing green beans, they said just leave it alone, spider mites come and go. So I left them alone, and yeah, within a couple of weeks, the spider mites ran their course and disappeared. But they can do a lot of damage in the meantime. So if you spray them with an oil spray, that is the best thing we have for spider mites, and it's organic. Just suffocate them off if that's what it is. But that's what I think you're looking at, because that makes the leaves look really old and beat up real fast. Yes.
Another question about avocados.
Mhm.
I'm trying so hard to get them to survive.
Mhm.
I have like a slope. Is it better to, because I'm running out of space, to plant it the top, middle, or the bottom?
Well, top of the slope has the best drainage. Middle is fine too, not the bottom.
Okay.
Bottom is going to get wetter than everything else in the garden, so or poor drainage, just put it that way. The water's not the problem, but if it stays soggy all winter, that might be a problem.
So if you had a choice, would you grow the top or the middle first? Just not the bottom.
Well, the tree would prefer the top.
No, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, questions from the internet.
First question from Daniel. Here are a few topics that I'd like to hear Gary speak about. Growing mangoes is the first one.
Well, these are long topics. That would take a whole session. Mangoes, we treat them a lot like avocado. So if you see our avocado cultivation tips, then we pretty much do the same thing for mangoes. They're not as sensitive to root rot, but they do get sunburnt. No, that would take up an entire class to do a session on.
Future class.
Yeah.
Growing jacarandas.
Well, that jacaranda tree is a good blooming tree, or a jacaranda. No tips on them. I mean, generally we have to treat them like any other plant. We don't grow jacaranda here, so we sell some, but we don't grow them, so they're not in our best soil. So if you want to do a real good job with them, it's nice to buy them small. Remove a lot of the soil they come with and replace it with our top pot or replace it with natural dirt, and that'll help them just look better and grow better. Other than that, they're just an ordinary, nice blooming tree. It does take them, usually they have to grow 10 to 15 feet before they bloom, unless you get the dwarf ones, which will bloom at 2 feet.
And finally, tips for gardening on a sloped yard.
On a slope yard? Well, so the only problem with slopes is that it's real hard to water them. Well, of course, it's hard to walk on them too, but it's hard to water them. If you build retaining walls and level it off, then it becomes the easiest place to garden in your yard. But on slopes, the main problem has always been water. So the key on that is if you use sprinklers, it's real short intervals. A slope will only hold maybe 1 minute, 2 minutes of water without running down. So you water like 2 or 3 minutes at 5 o'clock in the morning, 2 or 3 minutes at 6 o'clock in the morning, 2 or 3 minutes at 7. You just keep doing short bursts because you don't want it to just run off and go into the street. But that's always been the hardest part about slopes, is just getting them watered properly. If you know, I built retaining walls on the first house I had, and after I built the retaining wall, which cost a lot of money, it was the best place to garden my garden after that.
Okay, the next one is from Sergio. I'm looking for a recommendation for a plant that can be put next to the front door of my house. The area is partially shaded, but will get full sun for a few hours a day. I need something nice that is a good 5 foot tall, that doesn't make a mess since it's 3 foot from the door. I'm in Riverside, and we do get 100 to 105 temperature in the summer.
Okay. Well, one tree that has always been good is Podocarpus maki, which is a conifer-like plant that will grow in both sun or shade. It doesn't bloom, so it's kind of boring, but easily kept any height from about 3 foot to about 8 foot is its height range. It kind of gives you an Asian feel to it, but the plants are quite upright with branches that go to the sides, and then the short needle-like foliage, soft, doesn't, but they'll just give you kind of a look like this, and very tidy. I know my father had one on the east side of his house for 40 years, and he just maintained it right about this size, maybe this height. And I have one at my current house too that's on a corner spot, just like that. Yes.
I have some that go all the way up to my roof. I mean,
Well, it's not maki. So there's the Podocarpus family. There's a lot of Podocarpus that are timber trees that want to grow 40 feet
okay.
or 50 foot. The maki is a dwarf version of it's a dwarf, natural dwarf.
A question from Jeff. I have an area of the yard. I would like to create a seating/fire pit area using pea gravel as the base. What keeps weeds from coming up? A weed barrier fabric? If so, what type is the most durable?
Well, we're not a fan of weed block cloths in the home. They work if you just leave them totally bare and ugly, because they're black woven plastic, and they work that way. But if you cover them with anything, the weeds grow in what you use to cover them with. So the main thing is this: if you get about 3 or 4 inches of gravel, weeds have a hard time getting started in there. Plus, if they do get started, they're really easy to pull out. So that would be my suggestion. Just get a deep, at least 3 inches of gravel. 4 inches may be better. And that's going to stop the weeds for a long time, at least a decade or so. It's clean gravel.
Next question. How to propagate cuttings from pomegranates? From Andy.
Well, pomegranates, fortunately, are fairly easy. Most of them, typically they're deciduous trees. And the way we do it, because we propagate, I propagated about 20 plants this year. So if you have a tree, pomegranate tree, you look for growth that grew this year that's nice and straight. So say you had a tree like this, and suddenly it grew a nice straight branch straight up. This is the branch you propagate. So you take what is called 1 year growth, or this year's growth, and you take a piece that's about pencil thick and about 5 to 9 inches long, So a piece of this stem that's about, and make sure you know which way is up. Now what we do is we just stick them in a pot with our acid mix. That's our sterile mix. Acid mix is peat moss and pumice rock. It's considered sterile. So we put it in there, and then we put the cutting in there. We sink it in so that only an inch or so at the top is exposed, and the rest of it's sunk into the soil. And we do that usually in January or before they leaf out again. So anytime after the leaves drop in December and before they leaf out in February, we stick them in this pot with the acid mix, keep it wet. You can put it in the sun or shade. It's got to be some brightness. Full sun is fine because there's no leaves at this time. And then it starts growing and leaves out and roots out too. We get about 60 to 70% take. So not all of them will root. Some of them will start growing leaves and then fail because they don't have any roots. But we're getting about 60 to 70% take on that. So that's how most pomegranates are propagated from. We call it hardwood cuttings in the winter off of 1-year-old growth. I haven't tried older growth than 1-year-old. It's possible that might work too. Now you can do greenwood cuttings, new growth in the summer. It's a lot more involved and not as successful.
Okay. From Cynthia, would you please explain the best crop rotation system for a vegetable garden? Oh, from Cindy.
What was the last thing?
That was just from Cindy.
Well, a friend of mine who runs an organic farm, so they do this for a living, says that they have a 10-crop rotation cycle, and we leased land from them for 4 years, and we never saw them put the same crop on the same plot of dirt in the 4 years we were there. So their 10-crop rotation cycle takes at least 4 years, which means that for a homeowner, you would have to have, say, if you're using raised beds, at least 4 of them. And then if you're growing tomatoes, you put them in this bed 1 year. Next year, you put them in this bed. Next year, you put them in that bed. Next year, you put them in that bed. So there's 4 years between growing the same crop. In the same bed with tomatoes, you put the plants that are related to it. Peppers, tomatillos, eggplant, potatoes are all related. So you keep them together. And then move them and move them and move them every year until you've got at least 4 years behind you. I mean, 3 years is okay. 4 years is better. And if, that, and we weren't there after 4 years, so they might have been a 5-year rotation cycle. I don't know. 10 crops, they said, between the initial crop and, and nothing related to it for 10 years. So.
Okay, this one's from Eduardo. I had a question about soil found in nature. Let's say I'm an avocado in Guatemala and I have 5 feet of dead leaves on the ground above the dirt. Then an avocado fruit drops and sprouts on the ground on a 5-foot deep pile of dead leaves. Wouldn't the roots be growing in a pile of dead leaves? Wouldn't the roots have to go down 5 feet to get to the mineral-based dirt? I feel like I'm missing something about growing in dirt versus dead trees. It makes sense that compost prevents the roots from breathing, but how does it work in nature when there is a 5-foot pile of dead leaves on the ground?
I wasn't there to see the 5-foot layer of dead leaves that my friend saw in Guatemala. So if they're avocado leaves, they're pretty coarse, and apparently the air can get through there well enough. If it's ground up compost like we do with the chipper or a grinder, there's no way 5 foot would anything could live in that. It'd be just like a regular compost pile. But dead leaves and trees are fairly coarse if you don't chop them up to begin with. So apparently they're getting air through that. Again, I didn't see it myself, And if you started an avocado pit, the roots would have to be in actual dirt. They won't really live in the dead leaves. We know the dead leaves of avocado trees, according to the research put out, chemicals come out of there that help prevent root rot. But still, you'd have to grow them in real dirt. So it's probable that the avocados don't usually come up in a 5-foot layer of dead leaves at all. Of course, they were meant to be carried away by a giant tree sloth or a ground sloth, and when they evolved, there were the giant ground sloths around, so they would probably eat the avocados and throw the pits somewhere else, not underneath the tree where the leaves are piling up.
And then his second question, what are your thoughts on LED grow lights? He has a cacao tree grown indoors to control the humidity, but had to move it to different apartment courtyard. Now I have it under some LED grow lights, and how do I know if I have enough light or too much light without burning the plant? Is burning the plant even possible with LED lights?
Not my field of expertise. I mean, there's a whole agricultural division of growing under controlled conditions. What is it called? DEA or indoor agriculture, and I haven't studied that. I know about real sunlight, but LEDs, we know that you need, they usually use blue and red. Other than that, I have no clue as to how to operate that.
And then what are your thoughts on beneficial insects like ladybugs instead of sprays for pest control?
Well, yeah, we'd rather have the ladybugs do the work. So it depends on the pests. Most pests, like the common pests, aphids, mealybug scale, usually the ladybugs do the control just fine, or other natural predators like the parasitic wasp. There's several midges and several flies that are also beneficial. The main thing in your garden is you keep the ants out of there. We usually use this to make sure there's no ants in the garden, because the ants will shoo away the beneficial insects, because they like what the sucking insects excrete, which is sugar water. So we got to get the ants out of the garden. That's the main thing. If the ants aren't there, the ladybug should do the control on most of the insects, along with what are the other one, lace wings and everything else. If they are left undisturbed by the ants, they usually control the bad bugs. In the nursery, we can't afford to have all that activity with good bugs and bad bugs on the plants themselves. So we have to do a little cleaner. We have to do more preventative stuff here. But in my own home, I rarely ever spray anything. We just let the good bugs do the work.
Do you think there is a benefit to aerating water with an aquarium pump before watering plants? Perhaps more than just a few parts per million of oxygen in the water is better than whatever the city provides.
Well, in theory, our tap water has been aerated sufficiently when it comes to us. By law, the water districts have to make sure that it's 5 to 7 parts per million. Now, if you sprinkle irrigate, if you have a nozzle on the end of your hose that aerates the water, or if you have sprinklers, they're getting aerated in the air just fine. If you have just a flow of water coming out of something that's been stored and sitting like you have a rain barrel and it heats up during the day, yeah, you can lose all your oxygen out of that. I mean, we used to have a growing ground where we had, quote, a huge 500 and 1,000 gallon tank that we pulled water out of, but we know we had to aerate it, so we had a pump on that tank, and we had a good nozzle on the end of our hose to aerate that water before it went into the plant, into the containers. So that's where you really need to aerate it. It's you're storing the water in a tank that's exposed to the sunlight where it gets hot, because hot water loses its oxygen. And if there's anything in the water, like algae or anything else, as the algae dies, it also uses up all the oxygen in the water. So if aerate things, water that's been standing still.
What is your favorite way to trellis a grapevine and a tomato vine? Any specific products?
No favorites. I really don't have favorites. Now, I've been impressed by the people who don't trellis tomatoes, who just use single posts. So, in agriculture, especially in hothouses, they don't use trellises and things like that for tomatoes. They just run them up. They just have a single stem, and it's unique. And you can kind of do this in your garden too, but they actually have a pulley system that's located above, although I had a friend who just used 8-foot long stakes. You can do it that way. So they would attach the vine to a rope that's hanging from the ceiling in a spool. And as it grows up, up, say here you're making the flowers, and say here you got the ripe fruit, and the vine keeps growing higher. And what they're doing in a hothouse is they're lowering this rope, and as soon as they pick the fruit off the plant, they pull off the bottom leaves of this vine and then start coiling it on the ground. So they'll have naked branch with no leaves on it coiled on the floor of the hothouse, and just keep running this thing up the same rope, and then they lower the rope as it goes up, so you can have the same stem. They do this because they plant these only 2 feet apart in the hothouse, and at 2 feet, that's the max, that's the minimum spacing you can have to get sunlight all around the one stem. So if you have a tomato plant where you grow and let it branch and branch and branch, it's shading itself, and it's making itself less productive than it could be if you just kept it to one stem. So that's why they do it in a hothouse, but they do plant plants every 2 feet. We have some customers who do that in their garden. They plant them every 2 feet, one big stake, and that's all they do. They don't let it side branch because that's already maximum production they can get, which makes sense. If you don't mind spending the money for the extra plants, then you don't need to let it branch out, because it's less predictable when you branch it out how well they'll produce.
Do the geisha coffee plants have any specific humidity requirements? Coffee is typically grown in the mountains, so I'm wondering how they acclimate to the weather in Southern California. Is the SoCal winter too cold for coffee, or perhaps too warm? I have a geisha coffee tree under a ficus tree doing great, but it's not cold overnight. I'm wondering if it will need special care in the winter.
Well, coffee plants are now being grown commercially in California along the coastline. So we're similar, and we're not that different. So they set up in Camarillo. A lot of the orchards, avocado orchards and citrus orchards, are interplanting with coffee plants besides those trees. So they have double use in the orchard, coffee plants in part shade. So, and I think they've already done the research on it, saying that they do fine. Now coffee, the geisha coffee is from Ethiopia, mountains in Ethiopia. I just don't know the climate there, how humid it is. That's Eastern Africa. I would imagine it's fairly humid, but and fairly hot. But they're in the mountains, so I don't know it. Now the geisha coffee that won awards was grown in the mountains of Panama. I don't know the altitude and what was like, but it was not at sea level in Panama. It was from the mountains of Panama. So the coastal zones of California may be fairly close, but I grew coffee 40 years ago in my backyard underneath the plum tree, and it is just fine. It didn't show any stress. In those days, we had frost in the winter where we'd be in the 30s, in the 20s at night in the wintertime, and the coffee plant never showed any problems at that time. So they can currently go quite cold. quite a few degrees of frost before they have any problems.
And
Of course, the geisha coffee is a different species than the Arabica. So I was growing Arabica. I haven't grown the geisha under the same conditions yet.
I'll add that I have the geisha in my yard, and I planted them about a year and a half ago, I think, when we first got them. And they survived and looked fine this last winter. And at my house, my personal weather station recorded like down to in the low 30s. So I know I can handle that. And
Ours
then-
went through the low 20s and survived that. So
Yeah, they're pretty good. His last question is there a secret to growing living stone plants? I put one in top pot and it disappeared after watering it every day for a week.
I've never tried to grow living stones. They don't seem to like water. I don't know what's about them. I haven't grown them. So
Think?
Another question. I have a gardenia bush in a pot, and the roots are starting to show. I just put a topsoil over that.
yeah, a top pot on it. That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, keep the root shaded.
Okay, and then next question. From Darrett. If you water every day in warm weather, how often do you need to fertilize your plants if you're not using slow release chemical fertilizer like Osmocote? Does watering every day cause the fertilizer to leach out faster if you are using organic fertilizer like Dr. Earth?
Well, in theory, if you water the same amount of water, so your options are you can water, like we were told, once a week. In the old days, they watered once a week really heavily versus lightly every day. I don't know that there's any difference to that as how much fertilizer is leached out. I would think once a day flood irrigation would leach out more fertilizer than once a day light watering. So I don't know. So in other words, it's a matter of 10 gallons of water on this bush at one time, or actually better, 7 gallons of water once a week on this plant, all at one time, or 1 gallon every day on the same plant. I think the 1 gallon a day would be less likely to leach out the water than 7 gallons in one day. But I don't know. It depends on the fertilizer. The only thing that really leaches out is nitrogen. The other minerals don't really move when you water them. So the nitrogen is the key. Now, if it's in a pot, we have to water pretty much every day anyway, so there's no way to go around that. Is there any part of that question I didn't answer yet?
If you're using organic fertilizer versus the Osmocote, would that make a difference?
Well, organic, it depends on the fertilizer. There's so many different kinds of fertilizers. So the nitrogen moves when it's available. A lot of organic fertilizers, the nitrogen's not available initially to leach out. It has to break down before it leaches. So, but same thing with the chemical. There are chemical fertilizers that are time release that wouldn't leach out so fast either. And then there are some, if you get a totally water soluble fertilizer, every time you water, you're leaching out the nitrogen. But there's a lot of time release ones like this that you won't leach it all out because it doesn't come out at one time. It's not available to leach. So just depends what you use. I mean, when I was growing up, my dad told me you water every day, you fertilize once a month. That's in the days we're using organic fertilizers. So the rules in those days in a pot would be fertilized once a month. Again, in the ground, we don't usually have to do it that often. The ground doesn't leach things away as fast as a container does.
We sometimes see mushrooms growing in our avocado containers that we water every day. Is this bad for the avocado tree? As the day gets warmer, the mushrooms shrivel up. We fill each avocado container to the brim with water each day since it is hot right now, and we only use top pot in the containers so we could water more often.
Well, in nature, the major symbiotic partner to all trees and shrubs is a fungus called mycorrhizal fungus, and they do make mushrooms. So, or at least we think they do. They should make some kind of spore. So most mushrooms, if they're coming out of the trunk of the tree, you're in trouble. That's a bad fungus. If they're coming out of the dirt, it's just one of the many fungi that live in the ground. Not a big deal. Yeah, but if it's coming out of the trunk, you're in bad shape. But if it's coming out of the dirt, most of those are beneficial. Pardon? I would think any mushroom I would consider poisonous unless you know what you're really doing.
Also,
I don't know mushrooms that well, ID wise.
also, we have runners on our strawberries in a container on our patio. If we take the runners off the mother plant and replant them somewhere else, will they grow roots?
Well, if the runners on the mother plant, it's better to watch them or put the runners in a little pot of dirt and let the roots grow before you take them off. I have, though, taken off runners with no roots, stuck them in a pot, and they made it. Those little runners are really strong. So what we're talking about is the regular tomato plant. They send out these little stems. Oh, strawberry, thank you. Strawberry plant, and then at the end of this running stem, they'll start a new little plant growing on there. A lot of times it'll look like that with a little swollen area, but no roots yet. And I've taken them at that point, cut them off, and then just stick them in a pot of soil, and they start growing. Not full sun, but say half day of sunlight on them. And they actually send out roots and start growing. So you can do that, although it would be nice if they started initiating roots before you cut them off the mom. But that's how just about every strawberry is propagated by the wholesale growers. They take the runners.
When transplanting a 5-gallon peach tree into a bigger container, how deep do you place the root ball in the container?
Well, generally, the rules on potting up the vast majority of plants, you don't change the soil level. So if in your 5-gallon pot, the soil is like this, your tree's like this, when you put that in the 15-gallon, the larger container, you want the soil level and the 5-gallon root ball to be right where it was before, and then put the soil on the sides and the bottom. You don't want to sink the trunk in. When we plant things, we usually don't care if we sink it in about an inch, but I wouldn't go much deeper than that.
They also
And truthfully, they're not that sensitive, because when I first started growing peach trees, I remember they have a graft union usually about 3 inches above the soil level where they've been grafted. So what I did is I just buried the graft union with dirt so that they were actually about 4 or 5 inches below grade. I still didn't have any problems with them. So it didn't hurt them that significantly. However, in theory, you shouldn't do that. You should leave them at ground level.
they had the same question about avocado trees. Is it the same?
Yeah, pretty much you want to leave the avocado plant at the same level. So,
And then last one for them is,
I mean, the main reason we're saying that is that if you start burying the original roots deeper and deeper in the ground, then they start suffocating. So generally, if the plant is in the ground, the soil only breathes about a foot deep. So if you planted a plant and you drop the root ball, say 2 foot deep, those roots just suffocate. They can't get enough air to them anymore. So that's the main reason we don't want you to go deeper and deeper. But, if you're not more than 2 foot deep, you may not have any problems.
what is the best way to protect fruit on a tree from getting taken by animals like birds and squirrels?
Well, squirrels are very difficult. You'd have to almost kill them, air rifle, totally cover the tree with netting. That's a hard one. If you have a big enough property, you put an owl box on your property. Have an owl, that's the squirrel's main enemy. Yeah, squirrels are almost impossible unless you kill them, or you can trap them. We have a hard trap, and then drive them away and let them go somewhere else, which is actually illegal, but nobody polices that. Birds are easy. You can scare them away with things that are either shiny or the fake snake works, or you cover they do make bags you can cover small trees with that'll keep anything out.
Question from Todd. I use dairy soil techniques for something close to top pot. I'm using a timer to water my plants, and halfway through the 3-minute timer, water is flowing out the bottom of some pots, seemingly at the speed it's being watered. Am I overwatering and possibly going through fertilizer faster? All my pots are potted. All my plants are potted, not in the ground. What's a good gauge of how much water to put into a plant?
There's no gauge. So the problem we have with pots is they have holes at the bottom. And they claim that when you water a plant from the top, generally the water goes down in columns to the bottom, very bottom first. You can get water coming out those holes before you water anything. And then they said it backs up. It kind of goes to the bottom and then starts backing upwards. I don't know how you can judge that. If you're getting adequate water or not. So it's just better to water thoroughly to make sure the whole thing's wet. But
If you put a saucer underneath.
well, if you put a saucer underneath, that does help. That does help. But yeah, they said the water goes to the bottom initially and then starts going up into through the root ball. Is what they showed in the time test that they did. What do you call that? When they showed it happening in a clear container, water just goes to the bottom and starts backing up. So you're probably going to get water coming out those holes no matter what. If you water adequately, the water is always going to come out the bottom. That's
make it easier for the soil to take the water,
You're talking about aerating the soil in the ground?
or in the pot.
Well, it helps it helps water go through there real quick, but it may not help it hold at all.
Because I do grow a lot of my plants in the pot, and that's exactly what I'm dealing with. As soon as I put the water in, 5 seconds later, you see the water at the bottom,
Right.
indicating there's a drain path for those waters to go in and come right out.
Yeah, a lot of times, if the plant's in a container and the root ball shrinks a bit, then the water just goes down the sides and comes right out. So a saucer does help. Saucer of water. I mean, the other thing that helps if we design the containers differently. So if you've got, especially if you got our soil in it, instead of having the drain holes at the bottom, they should put the drain holes about 2 inches off the bottom, so that there's a reservoir of water being held in there. If it's our soil, this won't hurt the plant at all. Most potting soils, which are compost, yeah, that's deadly. Can't do that if you're putting compost as the potting soil, because that'll just turn into a sewer section down there. But with proper soil, yeah, you don't put the drain holes at the bottom. That's essentially what a saucer is the drain holes aren't at the very bottom. And they make a lot of water holding containers, earth boxes, things like that are made exactly the same way. The drain hole is not at the very bottom, so that the water isn't wasted as badly.
The next question is another mango one. So probably we'll have better answers with a mango class, but Uh, any tips on growing mangoes in SoCal? I'm trying to grow a Malika mango, but it's not doing so well, and I'm not sure why. From Paul.
Well, mangoes do well around here. I mean, we've grown mangoes for about 40 years now. You know, in those days they told us we couldn't grow mangoes here, but in those days we also had more frost. But mangoes don't. The main thing mangoes have trouble with is our spring bloom. Our gloomy weather in the spring gets them a lot of mildew on the new growth and on the flowers. So we have to hit them with the oil and baking soda is what we do to control the mildew on them. Temperature has not been a problem. They can take as hot as we can get, and they can take as cold as we can get. We had mangoes with no damage at 23 degrees in 1990, where we were losing all these young avocado trees, totally losing them. The mangoes came through that with no damage. So we were really impressed with the mangoes being cold tolerant. Some of them bloom really early, which can be a problem. If you have any other problems, it's probably just the soil they're coming with from the growers. So a lot of mangoes are sent from Florida to California, but they can't send dirt from Florida to California, so they're in something other than dirt and not using anything very good. So you might have to change the soil. Plus, you know, most growers who grow mangoes locally also don't use real dirt or anything that like our top pot, so you might have to change that. But we haven't had any real nasty problems with mangoes. So when we've grown them, they've been fine.
Next question from Jen. We are preparing to tear down a patio cover which has a 40-year-old Japanese maple planted next to it. The branches have grown underneath the patio cover and will need to be cut back to accommodate the construction and new patio cover. My concern is that the tree is fragile. We cut back too much on watering when the city asked homeowners to curb watering several years ago. About 2/3 of it died, and we consulted an arborist who used a support wire to hold it steady, and that support wire is attached to the patio cover. The arborist said that the living portion of the tree would eventually grow vertical and become the new center of the tree. That process to recenter the tree started about 7 years ago, and the tree seems pretty strong now. My question is, what is the right time of year to prune a Japanese maple tree, and is there a special process to trimming a Japanese maple?
No, proper pruning, but most arborists know how to do proper pruning. So Japanese maples, one of the problems we have with maples in general is they don't heal wounds well. So you don't want to do too much pruning on it. Fewer cuts. Don't do a lot of little cuts all over the place. Do single big cuts is fine, but not too much because they don't heal their wounds well. Plus, if the tree lost a lot of itself in the past, you have that burden on the tree's health. If you lost, what they say, 2/3 of the tree during the drought, you've got probably a lot of dead maple roots running alongside the healthy roots that are not helping at all. So that can, and the dead root system can get a fungus that can kill the rest of the tree. So that's one of the problems that you face too, is if there's too much dead stuff around the tree, that can eventually cause it to die. This is the right time. So the only time we don't like to prune anything is in the spring when they just start their spring growth. That's the weakest point of the year. The rest of the year, summer, fall, winter, they're at full strength. They can seal their wounds better. I don't know if was there another part of the question? I don't know. I think I got it. But yeah, maples are one of the sensitive plants to over pruning. I mean, one of the things we know about maples is their habit of growth is kind of odd looking. So they usually do this. They go from one branch to three. Wherever they branch 3 times. And generally that's not as attractive as going from 1 to 2. So when we trim maples, we generally get rid of the 3s and maybe cut that one out, maybe cut this one out, maybe cut this one out, just to go from a 1 to 2 branch pattern rather than 1 to 3. And a lot of times the maples will kill off one of the branches on their own just to make it simpler. But that's what we like to see is on all trees, they look better going from 1 branch to 2 rather than 3. But maples have that weird 3 thing.
Question from Beth. I've got 2 apple trees with a lot of baby apples on them in clusters. Do I thin the clusters, and how frequently should I be watering to maximize the health of the baby apples?
So apples are one of those plants that really likes it wet. My textbook written by a farmer in Oregon says, he doesn't know how we can grow apples in California. In Oregon, they expect the ground to be wet 5 foot deep. California, you barely get a foot of moisture in the wintertime. So, but apples, they really want it wet, especially when they're blooming, setting fruit, the fruit's initially sizing up, and then as the fruit's finishing in the fall, most apples finish in the fall, lots of water at that time too to get good size. Generally, you only want 1 apple per cluster. So when they bloom in clusters between 3 and 10 flowers or even more in a cluster. And often all those flowers start making fruit. When they're about, say, close to an inch in size, that's when you know that they're set. I mean, up until they're, say, as big as your thumbnail, a lot of times the tree will abort most of those little fruits in the cluster and save the nicest. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So you make sure the fruit is set and going to make it to development, then you cut off all but 1. Usually you save the one in the middle, which is the biggest fruit already, but sometimes if the middle one got scarred by a bug or something, then you save one of the side ones. And you want to make sure the clusters are far enough apart that the apples as they're developing don't touch each other. Because if 2 apples touch each other as they're developing, you can get codling moths, holes in both apples where they touch. Apples hanging singly usually don't get worms in them.
Next question from Scott. My open question pertains to potted sunshine blue blueberry bushes. They are now 4 seasons old and have been excellent fruit producers. Each year I have pruned the vertical shoots back to soil level to keep the shape of the plants. I hosted lots of twigs and small growth that has developed around the inside of the plants over time. When is the best time to prune blueberry plants, and what is the best method for pruning them correctly?
Blueberries rather simple, so they grow new canes every year, and you don't have to prune those down unless you want them to be shorter. But a lot of blueberries can reach 5 or 6 feet. And then these things, on their second year of life, they will bury all along the stems, just like a line of berries. And at that time, they start branching out. And then the next year, they get berries along these stems. And as the years go by, these branch out. And they keep branching out until they only get about an inch of growth on each branch, and then you'll get as many berries as you did with this long cane. So what they say to do is you find these tangled masses of short branching, usually by the 4th or 5th year of the plant's life, and you just cut that out. Just eliminate that whole thing and make room for new branches to come up out of the base of the plant and take over, because these are the ones that will give you the most fruit the next year, the long new growth, rather than all this short stuff that's developing on what used to be the long new growth. So, and right now, after the first crop of berries off, good time here to do that. and opens it up so you allow new growth to come out the bottom. We've had a few blueberries that are problematic in that they don't make any new branches from the base, but most of them do make new branches and they'll fill up that space that you leave. But I've had one blueberry that never would make a new cane from the bottom, and you just have to leave that. That's all you got to work with.
From Todd and Dory. My family got back from a trip about a week ago. We're gone for 2 weeks. When we got back, we realized the sprinklers in the backyard were off. Our small backyard of St. Augustine grass was brown and mostly looked dead. It's been a week now and it seems to be growing back, but will take time. Do you have any recommendations for speeding up the greening of the dead grass? It's coming back in various green patches, but there are still areas that haven't taken off yet. Any suggested fertilizer? We are watering it more than usual, but wondering how much water we give it, and will it cause issues if we overwater this grass?
No, like we said a few weeks ago, no such thing as overwatering. St. Augustine comes from the deep south where it can rain 50 inches a year, so you really can't overwater it. So what we've known, the research we got from University of California, or sod company research, they said that any lawn can be dormant brown for 6 months and it doesn't kill them. 3 months. 3 months. So 2 weeks is not long enough to kill your St. Augustine. It's still alive. You just have to get the moisture down again. So St. Augustine needs the most moisture of any lawn, or needs the deepest moisture of any lawn. So what we mean by that is you take a stick, maybe not quite this thick, or this thick is fine, piece of rebar like this works. See how far you can push it into your lawn, and that's how deep the moisture is getting. So on St. Augustine, what I've been told is you have to be able to push this thing 18 inches into your lawn to make it wet enough to grow St. Augustine properly. So generally you water lawn in no more than 4-minute intervals, but over and over and over. So 4 minutes, wait an hour, 4 minutes, wait an hour, 4 minutes, wait an hour, and then you see if you can stick this in the ground throughout your lawn 18 inches deep, and then it'll grow back. If you can't push it down, say at least 12 inches deep, it probably will stay dormant. If it's brown now, but it should wake up. It should wake up. My favorite fertilizer is just some type of compost. We sell one product called garden compost, and you can spread that thinly over your lawn. That's it. Excellent fertilizer.
Question from Leon. My 4-year-old grafted first love gardenias are all blooming, but the flowers turn brown quickly. They are in the ground 1 block from the coast in full sun, southwest facing. My neighbor has one in a pot sheltered from the west sun, which is always beautiful. Is it my location or soil?
Well, you didn't buy it from us, so that's one problem. We don't know of any gardenia that's on the market that's in real good dirt, so it's probably just unhealthy. First Love, which is also known as Amy, the leaves should be about that big, say, well, maybe not quite that big, 3 to 4 inches long. The flowers should be this time of year 4 or 5 inches in diameter. If they're not that big, then it's not a healthy plant. We know the nursery that grafts them onto a stronger rootstock because they won't grow in, they don't seem to do well on their own roots in the soil that the nursery grows them in. So they had to use a stronger rootstock that can handle the product that they're using as soil. We find gardenias, especially that one, to be extremely easy to root in our own soils. Our Astomix, our top pot, they grow just fine. They have no issues. But I haven't seen any grower out there. I don't know any grower that I can buy a gardenia from that will eventually not be unhealthy. I mean, they look good when you get them, and then the leaves get smaller and smaller, and the plants get less and less green. And if that's the case, they're just suffering. The root system isn't very good. So, and it's hard to fix gardenias. So like we used to fix citrus and we never lost a single one. I tried fixing gardenias in the wrong dirt and lost the majority of them. So they're not that easy to fix. They're real sensitive to root damage, but we find them super easy to root cuttings and grow them in proper soil. So that's what we do. So if you buy one from us, called Amy. Amy was the original name of First Love, and it was a name that that honored the breeder's daughter that had died. I'd rather use that name than a marketing name. Yes.
Are you familiar with a tree called Metsequoia glaustrophobes, which is a dawn redwood?
Yes, we used to carry that.
Oh, I was curious because it's one of my favorite trees, and mainly because it doesn't corrupt your sidewalk, and it grows very tall, and it's a Chinese. Its original origin is Chinese, and it's one of the few, quote, not evergreen. In other words, during the winter,
it looks dead.
Yeah, but it's a beautiful tree, and I just wondered if you ever carried it.
We used to have a supplier that we get them from, some nice big specimens that already had the furrowed bark, which is absolutely gorgeous.
Yes.
But that supplier went out of business, and I don't know if I have to check our current supplier to see if they carry those. But that is, I mean, the bad thing about it is that's you're talking about the dawn redwood, Metasequoia leptostroboides, which is supposedly a living fossil too. But it's a beautiful tree. It's got much greener foliage in the spring than most conifers do because it's a new set. I mean, it's a new set of leaves.
Very soft leaves too.
Yeah, it's a nice looking tree, and then it looks like it's dying in the fall, unfortunately.
And it's got ornate bark.
Yeah, that bark is, I mean, incredible bark. Bark itself can be, if you cut down an old tree, that bark itself would make gorgeous furniture. Just incredible looking bark on
And I think they grow a lot of them in Oregon, from what I heard.
Yeah, they said there's some 100-footers in Ohio, so they can live throughout the southern United States, the 50 states, lower 48 states.
I have one other question about lemon trees, citrus.
Mm-hmm.
We've noticed that the tree goes, there's one in the ground and one in the pot, and they go through stages, but a lot of the new growth sometimes gets attacked by something that causes the leaves to curl. And I've started to use the all seasons on it, but is that pretty normal?
Well, yeah, it's always happened. Now, in the old days, it was just citrus would get hit by aphids on the new growth, and it would make the new leaves kind of roll over. They'd curl longitudinally or that way. But now we're in the summertime, we get hit by the citrus leaf miners, which will just make them warp up from side to side. And that one we use spinosad to control that. The aphids, we don't normally treat aphids because it's not that damaging to the plant. Even the citrus leaf miners, commercially, they don't treat it at all because they said it's not really hurting the crop that bad. Now, when the citrus leaf miner first came into California from Mexico, it was nasty because there weren't enough natural predators going after it, and we were actually losing entire branches. But nowadays, it just makes the leaves do this. And the orchards don't bother to treat it. Aesthetically, it's not gorgeous, so you can use something like this every few weeks, or even just once a summer. We'll stop most of it. It lasts 2 weeks on the plant. And the aphids, we just don't normally yeah. So the leaf miners, yeah, they're there. You can treat them if you like. They're not. They consider them a quote bee pest because they're not damaging the crop.
Okay, next question from the emails from Cho. I've started noticing a hole with some kind of white powder on the main stem of the avocado tree about a month or so. But a few days ago, I noticed there was another second hole, as well as some of the branches had similar holes as well. What is it, and what can I do to resolve this?
Okay. So that's a bug causing holes in the bark of the avocado trying to get in to lay eggs. The new bug that's doing that is the polyphagus borer. If it's successful getting in, then it introduces a fungus that kill off entire portions of your tree. It's an interesting insect. It's a little tiny beetle, it's not a bark beetle, it goes into the wood of the tree and introduces a fungus because its larvae can't eat wood. Its larvae eat fungus. So it makes the fungus attack the wood of the avocado, and then the larvae eat the fungus that's attacking the wood. It's a really weird symbiotic relationship. The white stuff is the plant fighting off the beetle. So when the beetle tries to go in, the sap's coming out and stopping the beetle from getting in. When the sap dries, it turns into a white powder. So you're seeing that the tree successfully stopped this beetle from getting in. If it's got good sap flow, the beetle can't get in, can't get the fungus in there. It's like blood pushing out to stop infection from going into your body. Same thing. So that's a good sign. Just keep up the watering. But that's all it is dried sap.
Okay, next question from Sam. What soil mix do you recommend to use when planting a new grass lawn? I know your recommendation for fruit trees, but not for grass.
Okay, so all the text, the proper text on grass says that grass does best on the native soil no matter how bad it is. So you don't modify your soil at all. Whatever it is, you level it off. I mean, if it's rock hard, you might want to till it once just to loosen it up a bit. But you just put the grass right on it, whether it's sod or seed. Now, that said, it depends what you're going to do with your lawn. So, like in all the football, the professional sports stadiums, they don't use dirt at all. They put them on 2 foot of sand. So if you went to Anaheim Stadium or any of the major stadiums, you'll find, of course, it's probably concrete, 2 foot of sand. They put the sod on top of that because sand can't compact. So you don't get the ruts in there when they're running the mowers over them and stuff like that. Or if you play on them a lot, you won't get low spots because the sand doesn't compact. So if you're using them for heavy play use, if you cover that area with sand, that's fine. Because if you have real clay soil, then you tend to get, these ruts when you step on it, make this big hole. So, but in general, all the textbooks, the proper research shows that grass does best on the native soil. Grass is nature's soil improver. It does not need to have improved soil underneath it.
Another question, when using emitters and containers for fruit trees, how many minutes a day should I set the system to run for? Most of my containers are 15-gallon black plastic pots.
Well, if you have an automatic system, you can really do a lot with it. So, I'd probably run them 3 times a day, just a few minutes each. So everything in agriculture is going toward as consistent a moisture level, maintain a consistent moisture level at all times. You don't want the, too wet, too dry. Too wet, too dry was in the old days. They're trying to, so they just did a study. We just saw a study from Brazil that said, well, we were watering our orange orchard 2 hours every 2 days on our drip system. But then we switched it to 20 minutes 3 times every day, exactly the same amount of water, but distributed more evenly. And they said their orchard significantly better looking and better production just by changing how they added the water to it. Same amount of water, but just over a more, just spread it out. So that's what most agriculture is going to. There's some, there's a vineyard up north that waters, they said, 18 times a day. So if you got the technology, use it. Just water frequently. Frequently for short periods. So you don't waste water, but just try to they say it's like filling the tank. Just keep filling the tank, filling the tank, filling the tank. Don't overdo it, but don't let it run dry at all. The plants are much happier.
So just like humans,
Pardon?
just like us drinking water.
Right. Right. But a container, see, the problem with containers, if you water them once a day, containers usually dry out totally. So that what that does to fruit, the fruit's going to be smaller when you have dry periods like that. If you water 3 times a day, your fruit's going to be bigger. So.
And then I grow many fruit trees successfully, over 80, but I have had 14 mango trees go from looking perfectly healthy to withered and dead within days. All have been different sizes and varieties. I have no clue what disease it is. I haven't been able to find any pictures online that match the look of what has happened to my trees. Any thoughts?
No. I'd have to see some. That's yeah. I mean, as long as you're watering daily, you shouldn't have that happen. But I don't know. He didn't say how he was watering them or anything.
No, like maybe they're trees from Florida where they don't ship them in real soil. So if the soil isn't changed, then they could decline.
I mean, if you're in this area and we finally got some warm weather this last week or two for the first time this year, if the trees didn't have good roots, then they would start withering if they're in bad shape. Because they can survive cool weather and humidity without much root system. But once we get to actual summer weather and they don't have good roots, they would all just start shriveling up. That's possible. But other than that, yeah, mango should be fine here.
Question from Carrie. Have watched most of Gary's avocado videos and have found them invaluable. Now that I have several of our young avocado trees in the ground, I would like Gary to clarify a couple of points. Avocado feeding. Please clarify what months we should start and stop feeding avocados. Is it the same for all varieties you sell, or does it depend on when each variety flowers and fruits?
Okay. So when the avocados are young, the main goal is to make them real big and full. So in that case, it doesn't matter what time of year, you just keep feeding them. You keep feeding them, get them nice and big and full. And we usually like a regular good fruit tree fertilizer like this down to earth one. That's my favorite numbers on that box. Just to get them to grow and get some good foliage. Once they're maybe 6 to 8 foot high and wide, then you can back off because they don't need that much fertilizer to flower and fruit. The research from University of California shows that on a mature avocado tree, the only times of the year that actually help it fruit more would be 2 to 3 months before they're supposed to bloom, and 2 to 3 months after the bloom is over. So they don't want you to fertilize while the flowers are blooming. That's the main thing. Because if when they're in bloom and you fertilize them, fertilizers mainly to grow leaves. And if you encourage them to use their energy to grow leaves, they may abort fruit to do that. So it's better to starve them while they're blooming, but you can feed them well before they bloom to make more flower buds, and well after they bloom, after the fruit is set and growing, to grow the foliage at that time. Which on most avocados, most avocados bloom late winter through mid-spring, so you feed them in November, and then you feed them again in June. It depends on the avocado. Reeds, you'd have to wait a few months because their bloom is shifted over towards summer more.
I tried using, for avocado pollination, I tried using the honey spray, but I'm not sure I did it correctly. Do you spray the flowers directly or the leaves nearby? Do you need to spray all the flower clusters or just enough to get the bees to the tree?
Yeah, if you just spray the tree, the bees smell that and come and look for flowers to land on. So you don't have to spray the flower, you just spray the general tree area, and the bees will smell it and fly in and then get to it. Hopefully you have enough bees in your area to work.
Regarding your excellent top pot and acid mix, I travel a long way to pick up your soils and it's well worth the trip. I find I never know which of the soils I'll need more of. If I buy all acid mix, is there something I can add, like sand?
Our acid mix is just peat moss and volcanic rock, half and half. We'd like to see the peat moss level brought down to maybe a third. So if you mix acid mix with a bag of sand, 1 bag of sand to 1 bag of acid mix, the bag of sand will be half the size of the acid mix, which will then make it 1/3 sand, 1/3 peat, and 1/3 pumice rock. That's a pretty darn good mix. That's close to what our top pot is.
Question from George. Should nurseries inform customers about planting limitations like trees that are too large for neighborhood yards or that sprout suckers?
Oh boy, that's a legal question. Well, I mean, the problem with plants is they never stop growing. So what do? I mean, crepe myrtle trees normally they tell you can put them in a planter that's only 2 foot across, because crepe myrtles in the first 20 years of their life may only get about that big a trunk. But 30 years later, their trunks will be like this, and that thing will be busted up totally. It's like, I don't know the good answer to that one, because plants just don't stop. And you can always have a one in a million plant that, because a lot of them are genetically different, and the situations are all different, that just goes out of bounds. So what do? I mean, we know the plants that are always bad from the start, so we don't really recommend them, although some nurseries do. So it would be nice if, we know that the worst roots out there are coral trees, jacarandas, ficus, especially ficus, but any tree can cause root problems in time. I mean, that's a really tough question. That would be, I would say the homeowner has to do the research on that one.
Or the chopping?
And now there is a organization called Southern California Street Trees, that I don't know if you can probably find them on the internet. And got all these contractors, landscapers together to decide which trees to use and what size cutouts and pavement that would be safe. So they have a lot of recommendations on what trees to put in there, which you can put in near sidewalks to make it safe. But even some of those trees we find cause trouble. So even with the experts' knowledge, what do? It's like trees will eventually cause trouble if they get really old. I mean, 20 years is usually safe for any tree, and then after that, and they don't do this overnight. I mean, if you have a tree and you see the roots starting to come up to the surface, you can get rid of it. It's not like it doesn't happen overnight. Yes.
Question regarding getting rid of the tree. If you get rid of it and then you finally remove the stump, how long do you need to wait to plant another tree?
Well, that only is a problem if you try to plant the same tree again. If it's a different tree, it really doesn't care, but you do have to get rid of, when they stump grind trees, they leave all the grindings in the hole with the tree, or where the rest of the roots are, and you got to get that out of there, because no plant wants to live in stump grindings. So you have to clean out that hole and put either sand or some real dirt back into it, and then plant something that's not related, then there's no problem. But if you plant a related tree, then you've got to remove a lot of the dead roots in that area out. Well, it doesn't be that big, 3 or 4 feet. Clean out the area, make sure it's quote virgin soil with none of the remains of the tree that was there before, and then you can plant, in theory, plant the same tree again. But if it's different, yeah, it's not a big deal.
Thank you.
Oh, just back to on trees with, you know, aggressive roots and stuff. What about dwarf species of certain plants? Would that?
Pardon?
What about dwarf species of a certain trees? Would that?
Well, they take a lot longer.
They take a lot of, but they still grow aggressively once you get to a certain point, or
That's too general a question. It'd have to be real specific. Which dwarf?
like a nectarine. I have like a dwarf nectarine at home.
Yeah, I doubt that. Well, okay, so peaches and nectarines, their lifespan is only about 25 years. So they would never live long enough to cause trouble. In fact, they say the productive life of the peach tree is now down to 13 years, where it's not even worth having it after that length of time. So yeah, short-lived trees, birches, red buds, lots of stone fruit, just don't live long enough to cause root problems. They're all less than 3 decades.
What kind of garden do you prefer? A mix of fruit trees and ornamentals, a drought-tolerant garden, a formal design versus a wild English garden?
Well, they can all be nice. Depends what you want to waste your water on. I mean, the original garden was edibles and herbs, and quote flowers too. So that was the original reason to have a garden, is to grow something to eat, and that would be certainly worth the water, is to grow something edible. Of course, the drought-tolerant gardens make sense too, to have the natives and other drought-tolerant plants, so you don't have to water. All the other gardens, yeah, would be nice, but like right now, they're making certain homeowner associations making all grass, or was it the whole state's making all grass lawns that are not being used for playing on illegal. That's what we're hearing. So,
Do you think sprinklers or drippers are more effective in keeping plants hydrated?
not much difference there. So the dripping system, or when you install a plant, is much more accurate to waste less water when you put plants in. But once they get rooted in and your yard's established, the roots are all over the garden. So at that point, sprinklers are not wasteful either. So yeah, and drip systems are much more delicate, where you got to replace pieces constantly as the system ages. So a sprinkler is simpler to work with. It does waste water initially, but again, as the yard matures, it's no longer really that wasteful.
Last question from George. If you were in charge of the Great Park, how would you landscape it?
That's certainly not my field of expertise.
I think they should
No
make
comment.
a food forest. Okay, next question from Peter. Hi Gary, can you list and post some annual plants that complement each other that would share an area 8 by 16 feet that receives mostly direct sunlight in the summer, about 8 hours a day. Winter, partial sunlight, 4 hours a day. The sunlight coverage is 40 to 80% of the entire area, depending on the season. Summer more than winter.
Well, there are some plants that can go both ways, but that's a real complicated question. I'd have to,
You can email him.
yeah.
Okay. From Cindy, We're having trouble with our veggies not growing well even after using top pot mixed in the ground. Is it possible city water is causing problem for our plants? Do you ever see a need for filters on hose water? Just trying to figure out why their growth seems stunted.
Well, in your yard, so generally we don't think it's a water issue. The city water is kind of salty. Other than that, and this year and last year we had adequate rain, so the ground's not overloaded with salt at this point. So it's not a water problem, unless you're real close. Unless your chlorine level is super high in there for some reason. Certain areas have more chlorine in the water than others. I remember even when we were at the Great Park, our water was so. When we're irrigating, we could just smell the chlorine coming out of it. But still, we didn't have any problem with our plants. When you're growing vegetables in the ground, the main problem is, especially in an established yard, is going to be what else is in your garden. So if they're not, if it's isolated in containers, that's one thing. But whenever you grow vegetables in the ground, you got to watch out what trees are around you, what bushes are around you, because their roots can be right there with your vegetable plants. And vegetables have a hard time competing with tree roots. So if you're within 100 feet of a 60-foot eucalyptus or a big pine tree, you're probably having trouble with root competition. Or 10 feet from an established 8-foot tall hibiscus bush, those roots just run in there. It's almost like you've got to till that soil between every crop to get the competing plant roots out of your vegetable garden. That's the problem with vegetables in a home setting, is the root competition. You can check the moisture in the ground, again with the stick, to make sure you have enough moisture in the ground. You can push in between 12 and 18 inches by hand, and you've got the right moisture. And that's irregardless if you have root competition. If you can't maintain the moisture at 12 to 18 inches deep, even with the roots of the other plants there, then you can do it. Like we had customers that said, you can grow anything in the forest and lake forest as long as you water 3 times a day. Because they had, each yard had maybe 80 eucalyptus trees in it. It was just constant battling with the roots of the eucalyptus. But if you constantly watered, the plants would grow even among the roots of the trees. So that's what I'm thinking it is. I don't think it's a water problem or anything else going on.
Would a lot of mulch on top help?
Not much. That just stops surface irrigation. But if it's root competition, just remember, a 100-foot tree on an 80-degree day will probably use 50 gallons, 60 gallons of water a day.
Okay, now starting with the live chat questions from Inner John. What is the most cold hardy avocado tree?
Well, in the world, I don't know, but of the ones we're carrying, it would probably be either Stewart or Bacon. Can probably go into the low 20s. But a lot of that has to do with how healthy they are too. The healthier they are, and once they get a good size, if you get a trunk on your tree this big before the frost comes, then they can handle the frost a lot better. But among the avocados, we have the true Mexican ones, which are hardier than the Guatemalan, and the hybrids would be Stewart and Bacon. Probably Stewart, maybe a little more than Bacon.
From Gabe, my lawn here in Orange County is turning brown and purslane weeds are popping up. What can I do to get the green color back and kill the weeds?
So mainly it's water issue. Again, when you water lawn, don't water for more than 4 or 5 minutes at a shot. But at this time of year, we're having to water at least once a day, if not twice a day. So water 4 or 5 minutes at 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. and then an hour later water 4 or 5 minutes again, and do it pretty much every day. And that'll get the moisture in your lawn. If it gets much hotter, I know if it gets above 85, you may have to water 3 times a day. or if it gets above 90 especially. But just maintain the moisture so you can push a stick in the ground at least a foot. And if it's St. Augustine, deeper than that. But most lawns, if you can push this ground in the ground a foot, you've got the proper moisture. Now, purslane, that's a difficult weed to kill. Depends what kind of lawn you got. There's special weed killers we have, but it would depend on the type of grass.
Okay, so they should email the type of grass that they have. From Rockers 78. Oh wait, from Aloha Diane. Where can I buy Top Pot or acid mix in Hawaii?
Well, you got the volcanic rock there. Yeah, you can't. I don't think it'll ever be in Hawaii. The shipping would be in pretty bad. Just use pure sand. We found our original studies back in the 90s. Sand won all the tests. Just a pot full of sand, fertilize it, put some mulch on top. It works just fine. And if you want to lighten it up, you can add some of your volcanic rock, although you have to check the volcanic rock you have to see if it's got chemicals in it or if it's got alkalinity problems.
Rockers 78. My 3 orange trees hadn't bloomed this year and have no fruit after a good year last year.
What was the plant again?
Orange
Orange,
trees, Navel, Valencia, and Moro Blood. Tremendous year? Question mark.
Repeat that one from the beginning.
My 3 orange trees hadn't bloomed this year and have no fruit after a good year last year.
Okay. So that happens a lot. That's called alternate bearing. And any fruit tree can do that, fall into an alternate bearing pattern. So if you overloaded one year, then the tree is so weak after the crop's done, it's got no energy to make more flowers for another crop this coming year. But then what happens is if it has no fruit at all this year, the next year it's going to overbear again. And then it'll go into that cycle of 1 year heavy crop, next year no crop, 1 year heavy crop, next year no crop. It'll keep doing that for the rest of its life. So you can stop it. So we had a tree that was doing that, a Satsuma mandarin, where it just had like 500 tangerines on it 1 year, then nothing the next. So the following year, it started making 500 again. So what we did is around June or so, when the fruit was about that big, I pulled off 2/3 of it to get it down to about 200 so that it was no longer overloaded for the rest of the year. And then it fruited every year after that again. But any fruit tree can fall into that alternate bearing pattern where if they overload 1 year, they get nothing the next. Then you just have to thin it out the next year.
He also wants to know, can I do anything to get a late bloom, like Epsom salts or something?
Epsom salts is magnesium sulfate. I wouldn't put that on the plant except in minute amounts. It's a micronutrient. It's not a major nutrient. If you put too much on a plant, you can block the uptake of potassium, which is a major nutrient. So don't overdo the Epsom salts. Usually plants get a second bloom after a stress. So like on lemon trees, they usually get a bloom in the spring after the winter cold stress, and they get a bloom in the fall after the summer heat stress, so that they get 2 crops a year. And oranges and tangerines can do that too if they get much of a summer drought stress. They can bloom in the fall. Just know that oranges that ripen off season aren't usually as good as they are on season. So in other words, the regular oranges bloom in the spring and the fruit ripens the next winter. And it's because we have winters here that our fruit comes out the way it does. So we have warm days and cool nights in the wintertime, and that brings the fruit its nice color and also the flavor of it. The acidities build up with it. And so you get this real nice, sharp flavored citrus here in California. Now, in the tropics, they don't have cold winters. So when they grow oranges, say in Brazil, and they can get several crops a year because there's not really much of a season there. They said that the oranges there, and if you don't see Brazilian oranges in California because they're barely orange at all, they're kind of greenish orange because they don't get the cold weather to make them turn orange. Plus, they don't have the sharper flavors that we like here. They're real mild and bland. Great for juicing, not so good for fresh eating. So we don't get Brazilian oranges for that reason. The color and the flavor is different than the California grown oranges in the cold. So, and also when they do ripen in the summertime off season, if a navel orange is ripe on a tree in the summer, it's still kind of green. So it's real hard to tell. It's big, but it's hard to tell when it's ripe because it won't change color. So you know, if you see a big green orange on your navel in the summertime, you can pick it. It'll just taste kind of bland and sweet.
Okay, question from CG27. Yellow leaves on my citrus and avocado trees. What can I use?
That's why they're yellowing. I'd have to see them.
Okay.
Have to send pictures.
Send an email, CG27 to Gary@LagunaHillsNursery.com.
Now, a lot of tropicals this time of year are shedding last year's leaves a little bit late. We finally got some heat going, so a lot of the tropicals are waking up and making new leaves, and they're dropping last year's foliage. That happened a lot on the avocados recently, where they're dropping last year's foliage. As long as you're getting good-looking new leaves, you're in good shape. But yeah, you can send pictures.
From RXC23, when will we get to buy his soil in Stockton, California?
Made in Sacramento, which is real close, so you can get it. Any garden center that buys from our distributor, which is BFG, and most garden centers, I would say almost all garden centers and hardware stores buy from BFG Distributing. It's a horticultural distribution company. Our soil's in the catalog. They can get it if they want to, and it's not hard. You just click on it, so they can get it. It's just sometimes hard to get nurseries or garden centers or hardware stores to order something that they don't already stock. So, but they can get it. It's made real close.
From Rich's Top Gardening, is the Hollywood plum a variety you would recommend?
Well, locally, we've only gotten cold enough a few years to get that thing to fruit here. Back in the 80s, when we used to get good frosts, you know, down into the 20s, that would make fruit locally. Now, if you're along a major riverbed in Southern California, you do get enough chill to grow Hollywood, the purple leaf plum called Hollywood. Not easy to get that tree, though. I think I might have a supplier up north that carries it, but it's more for a cooler winter climate than we normally have here. But we, in the past, back in the 80s, I remember getting fruit 1 year on that Hollywood plum.
From S. Sanbo, how do you place emitters for drip on fruit trees? Do I make a ring of emitters or tubing or single emitter?
Depends what fruit tree. So on young fruit trees, one emitter by the trunk is usually adequate. On citrus, you can't do that. You'll rot out the trunk. So on citrus, if you look from above, and this is the root ball and here's the trunk, you'd have to put an emitter on two sides because you can't get the trunk area wet on the citrus, or can't keep it that wet. On any of their fruit tree, it doesn't matter. You can put it right on the trunk and keep it wet. But generally, we want to cover more area as the tree gets older. So you see a lot of orchards using soaker loops around the tree to get more of the dirt wet, and or micro sprinklers that'll sprinkle a major area underneath the tree. Yes.
What about buffers?
Bubblers are fine.
Yeah, because I have bubblers on all my trees, but I try to make sure they're on the outside and not close to the trunk, right?
That's fine. Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, it's mainly the citrus that are real sensitive to staying wet. You get that gummosis going on if they stay too wet on the trunk. But yeah, we found with citrus, if you kept away from the trunk and only dripped it on one side, it wouldn't grow. You have to have at least two sides on a citrus wet. So,
Question from Doug Tunneler. It was a similar question to the orange one. Same with my Japanese tangerines. Overloaded last winter, then no new blooms this year. So you probably answered your question.
yeah, there's alternate bearing.
Mm-hmm.
The one tree that we heard you can't stop alternate bearing on is in the ball avocado. Or one of our customers told us he couldn't break that alternate bearing cycle.
Question from K Anger 80. Can you fruit avocados in the desert? If so, what is the best tree to get?
Well, if you don't get too cold, and it depends which desert. The high deserts get too cold in the winter. The low deserts are so hot. I would imagine you can grow them underneath a screen. They do make these screens or this cloth that you can totally enclose a tree in or cover it. At least keeps it maybe 5 degrees cooler in the summer and maybe 5 degrees warmer in the winter, which would work. But otherwise move closer to the coast. It's so hot. And we find that new growth on avocados, so 5 years ago we hit 115 degrees out here. We found that the new growth on avocados shriveled, but the mature leaves weren't hurt at all by 115, but the new growth is shriveled, but they grew back real fast. So the trees can handle 115 at least. I don't know about 120 like you get in the low deserts. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Michoacan, Mexico is where a lot of avocados are native to, and it's certainly hot there, but they're higher up on the mountains where it's not quite as hot as the lowlands. Don't know what the heat tolerance is. We know the cold tolerance is only down to about 28 or so.
Question from Inner John. How do I keep ants from eating my avocado roots? My tree was in the ground.
Well, ants don't eat roots. They can bring pests around. They can also dig tunnels around it. We would just use probably this product to start with. Now, not all ants are killed by that one. So if that doesn't work, go to Orange County Farm Supply and buy a different bait or different chemical to kill them with. That usually works on the ants to get them out of there. Ants can take mealy bugs to the roots, which do kind of minor damage. I don't know that ants are that big a problem on the root area.
That's Amdro, in case
Yep.
they can't see it. Jabbed Con. Is top pot dressing fruit trees with worm castings or compost recommended?
What's nice always on top of the soil to have some kind of organic matter, dead organic matter. In nature, it's supposed to average 5 inches on top of the ground, so always good to cover the ground with. Just make sure it doesn't get buried into the soil too deeply.
Easy Lifestyles. I put 1-year-old wood chips 8 inches deep on my garden plot, 50 by 50 feet. Did I ruin my garden, or will it make it fertile in time? I have the patience. No more weeds, though. Love the channel.
Yeah, we've heard farms that go 12 inches deep on their row crops and 18 inches deep in their orchards with ground up plant material. So they said they call in the tree trimmers in the area and just pile it on. So 18 inches around trees. If it's citrus, maybe keep it away from the very trunk. And on their row crops, 12 inches deep, that's pretty deep. They said they move it aside, plant the crops, and as the crops grow, they put it back, and that does stop the weeds 100%. It does fertilize them quite well. They said this farm though does say they have chickens there, so whatever the ground up trees don't provide, the chickens provide the rest. And they've done that for decades, they said.
They also said, I also have a peach tree and 3 cherry trees on the border. The same mulching is fine.
Yeah.
From TR. I watched your hedge and screen video from 3 months ago. Would those recommendations also work in the San Francisco Bay Area? We want taller privacy options that grow fast and are low maintenance.
Most of the plants that I can remember are fine in the Bay Area. Bay Area can get a few degrees colder than we can here, but that's about it, a few degrees. So maybe the only one I think I might have mentioned, Eugenias, that may have a frost problem in the Bay Area if we ever get cold again. Because in 1990, San Francisco hit 18 degrees. So that's pretty nasty if we ever do that again.
From KNix2525. Are grubs beneficial or do they eat good roots?
Well, grubs in nature eat fungus. So we find a lot of grubs in compost piles because they're eating fungus. They can't seem to eat plants directly. A lot of them can't. So they're not really considered a huge pest in the garden. I mean, there's a lot of grubs in the ground. I mean, just hundreds and hundreds in every yard, yet they're not considered a major pest. No one really talks much about grubs. So apparently they eat fungus. Now, all plants have a symbiotic fungus partner called the mycorrhiza fungi. So that's probably what the grubs are eating is the fungus because it's easier for them to digest fungus than it is plant material. So they're often mistaken for cutting, well, they probably inadvertently cut plant roots as they're going through the soil. Like if you have 10 grubs per square foot in a lawn, they're cutting off enough plant roots that you can pull your lawn up like a piece of sod. They're not killing the lawn directly, but they're accidentally or inadvertently cutting the roots of the lawn. So you lay it back down, you can re-root it in. So we don't think they eat plants. I'm sure there's some grubs that do, but a lot of the grubs that we see in the ground are fungus feeders. And they're often associated with dead plants because there's a lot of fungus around dead plants, and people think that they cause the plant to die. But I think that's just association, not a true cause.
From BD, can date palms grow in the United States?
Oh, yes. There's a lot of date palms throughout California. What's the air out there? Palm Desert. But the problem with growing, so if you want the fruiting date palm, the problem with it is the fruiting date palm, the leaves are 30 foot long, or at least 20 foot long. So if you have a date palm in your garden, you got this palm, with a decent sized trunk, but you got leaves going 20 foot that way and 20 foot that way. And then you need the male too. So you need at least 2 palms, one female to get the dates and one male. And most of the date orchards are hand pollinated. So you have to know which, if you just plant date seeds, you'll get a tree, but you don't know if it's male or female. You don't know the quality because every seed is different. So usually the date palms, you go to the date farm and you buy the young date plants that are suckers off of the already growing palm tree, and you plant that in your yard. But then you got, you're using a couple hundred, even 500 square feet for 2 trees. It takes a lot of room.
From Melvin, when will we get the top pot in Riverside City?
Riverside City, what state?
This is Riverside City.
Well, in Riverside, California, you can get it. They just
From
have to
BFG.
convince, huh?
From BFG, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Just from a garden center there that wants to order.
Next question. Please share tips for growing watermelons, the best soil and fertilizer, pruning, etc. From Kristen.
Kind of late to grow them if you haven't started them already. I've only grown watermelons once. Now, my daughter's done it many times. The main thing is lots of sun. They like it hot. When I grew watermelons back in the 80s, I grew them in this particular spot where they got sun most of the day, but the actual plants grew on my patio on concrete where it was nice and hot, and they did really well there. I mean, so I had them in a planter next to my patio, and the plants grew maybe 10 by 10. I planted those, I remember, because I spitted out the seeds on Memorial Day into the bed. So they came up in June. And I got 2 watermelons in the fall that year that were both this big. So I was really jazzed. That's the only time I ever grown them. Was that timing, June planting and fall harvesting. In a real nice hot spot. And they were also getting watered about 4 gallons a day. Lots of water.
I'm trying to see if there's more. From Angel, how often should I water newly planted avocado trees? I currently have been watering with a 2-gallon bucket every 3 days. Also, should the soil be moist up to the point where it's visible at the top?
I like to keep them wet all the time. I would rather water every day. Every 3 days is really taking a chance getting dry between watering. I mean, as the tree gets established, gets its roots in the ground, after a year or so, you can probably get by with once a week, but they're much better off being watered constantly. Of course, in the wintertime, when the weather's in the 60s, you may not have to water at all. So just so you know, plants don't use any water at all below 55 degrees in general, unless the wind's really blowing. But the water use really skyrockets. So here at the nursery, we usually water daily. Now this year, it happened a month later, but usually April through November, up until the start of November, we're watering daily. From November to April, we're watering once a week. So generally, once you get to November, the nights are so cool that for half the day, the plant uses no water at all. And that happens, and this year it happened all the way through at April, it seemed. And finally in May, we definitely had to water every day.
From Matthew, how do you amend heavy feeding plants in Gary's soil? To add enough for tomatoes, for example, it adds so much to the top dress that it attracts pests. How do you amend heavy feeding plants in Gary's soil?
Well, if they're heavy feeding, you can, now, try to stay organic. So if you put an organic fertilizer on it and you put some garden compost on top of that, or chicken manure on top of that, that'll keep it well fed. Osmocote feeds, we use Osmocote here a lot because it feeds from day one, whereas the organics take a few days to a week to kick in. But once they kick in, they're pretty constant. Just maintain a layer of compost on the surface too, and that usually works.
From J. fine. How often can I fertilize my avocado trees in containers with fish emulsion? I've heard people do it once a week to 3 times a week.
Yeah, fish is difficult because it doesn't last that long. Well, you can't overdo it. You can do it every day if you want to, but I would think once a week would be sufficient.
From Miss Fuller Roller, Sarah, is play sand okay to use in pots?
It is, but it's funny what it does in containers. It's so rounded. And if you have a pot with holes in the bottom and the clay sand is dry, it runs out the bottom holes like hourglass. So it's almost like you got to get it wet first so it doesn't run so easily, or put some paper over the holes from the inside to keep it from running through before. And then once you wet it and keep it wet, it doesn't run out the holes. But clay sand's kind of funny that way. It just keeps running out the bottom hole.
Two more questions. I have a wisteria in a 5-gallon pot, and the leaves have turned light yellow and very thin. How can I fix it?
Well, wisteria is a real sensitive to soil. So if you bought this wisteria from someone it's from someone else and it's not in our top pot, they struggled. They struggled real badly. If they're in our top pot, just keep watering. But if they're not in our top pot, if they were from another grower, then they might look ugly the rest of the year. And then this coming winter, bare rooted and get it in better dirt. You can do it now. I mean, you can cut the wisteria vine back, get it out of the pot, wash the roots clean, and get it in either our top pot or pure sand or in the ground, which is better soil from them. That sounds like what's going on, because they're real sensitive to the wrong soil, to composting soil.
Last question. Best heat tolerant avocado tree?
I haven't seen much difference between the avocados as far as heat tolerance goes.
They like the heat.
They like heat. I'm trying to think if I've noticed any with thicker leaves or. I mean, we noticed that Fuerte is noted for being, Fuerte name means strong, and that is a strong variety of avocado. It's just not a very heavy producer. So, but Fuerte seems like it might be a sturdier plant than some of the other varieties. That's why they call it Fuerte. I mean, originally it was for cold tolerance, but the plant itself seems to be a little bit sturdier and more vigorous. And I would have to say Edronol also seems to be a very sturdy variety.
More questions?
Do you have any opinion on multi-grafted avocado trees?
On what?
Multi-grafted avocado.
I don't know the purpose.
Yeah.
I mean, we have one of our employees is making one. So, but multi-grafted trees aren't very stable. In other words, parts of it tend to take over. More vigorous scions tend to take over, or the original plant knocks all the grafts off of there. So they say multi-grafted trees are never very permanent, unless you keep on top of making sure that each different variety gets its proper amount of sun so it stays alive. Yeah. Otherwise, we know avocados can produce when they're only this big. So you just keep pruning them to keep them small and just plant a whole bunch of different trees. Okay. All right. Thanks for the questions.